Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the L1 or Ron Technical English Podcast. It's wonderful to have you with us again as we continue our journey into, well, the world of technical English, education, and all the ideas that really shape our professional lives. We want this space to feel, friendly, educational, and accessible for everyone tuning in, whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone curious about how we all learn. Hello, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm fine, Ellie. What about you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm actually really excited about today's session because looking at the materials we have in front of us, we are about to tackle a subject that I think touches a nerve for absolutely everyone. I don't care who you are, if you've been to university or even just high school, you have felt the weight of this topic.
I think I know where you're going with this. It's the classic university dilemma, isn't it?
It certainly is. Today we're doing a deep dive into grades versus skills, what really matters in university education. It's the battle of the century. In one corner, you have the GPA, the transcript, the exam scores, and in the other corner, you have the actual ability to do things, the soft skills, the practical knowledge.
It is a heavy topic. You're right. It really asks us to question the fundamental purpose of higher education. Are we there to collect letters on a piece of paper, or are we there to build a toolkit for life? And I think most people, if they're honest, still get that little spike of anxiety when they think about checking exam results, even years later.
Oh, absolutely. I still have that recurring nightmare where I show up to a math exam, I realize I've never attended the class, and I'm wearing pajamas. It's universal. But jokes aside, we have a very clear mission for this deep dive. We have a fascinating source document, a visual guide, really, that breaks this debate down into 6 very specific elements. And I want to walk us through them one by one.
I think that structure is going to be very helpful. It's easy to get lost in the philosophy of education. But our source material gives us a very concrete roadmap.
Exactly. So for our listeners, here's where we're going today. First, we're going to look at the obsession with grades. Why do we care so much? Second, we'll talk about exam pressure and academic load, the stress factor, and the biology behind it. Third, we're going to unpack the lack of practical and soft skills.
Which is such a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Then fourth, we look at the gap between university and the job market. Fifth, we discuss the student's role in self-development, taking responsibility. And finally, we'll try to answer the ultimate question. Are grades enough to build a future?
It sounds like a comprehensive journey. I'm ready to dive in if you are.
Let's do it. So let's start at the very beginning. Point number 1 on our list, the obsession with grades at university. Now, looking at the source image we have, there's a very clear symbol here. It's an open book, and stamped right on the page is a big, bold, red A+C.
It's the symbol of success, isn't it? The gold star. But we need to look closer at that word used in our source text. Obsession. It implies a pathology, doesn't it? A focus that has gone too far.
Right. It suggests something unhealthy. But let's play devil's advocate for a second here. Isn't aiming for an A+ a good thing? I mean, it shows excellence, it shows mastery. Why do we classify this as an obsession rather than just, ambition?
That's a very valid question. And to answer that, I think we need to introduce a concept from economics called Goodhart's Law. Have you heard of this?
The name rings a bell, but refresh my memory.
Well, the law basically states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Interesting. So if the measure is the grade, and that becomes the only target, it stops measuring actual intelligence.
Exactly. When the university makes the A+ the sole target, students stop optimizing for learning and start optimizing for the metric. They aren't trying to understand the engineering principles or the nuances of English literature. They're trying to figure out how to take the test. They are gaming the system.
That makes perfect sense. It's like in a video game. If you get points for jumping on turtles, you're just going to run around jumping on turtles. You aren't actually exploring the level or understanding the story. You're farming points.
That is a perfect analogy. And this point farming mentality creates a very brittle type of knowledge. Psychologically, it shifts the student from an intrinsic motivation learning, because it's interesting to an extrinsic motivation learning to get the reward.
And we know from plenty of studies that extrinsic motivation is it's much weaker in the long run.
Correct. It also feeds into what we call a fixed mindset. If my self-worth is tied to that A, then getting a B feels like an identity crisis. It doesn't feel like, oh, I need to study this specific topic more. It feels like I am not smart. And that fear of failure, it paralyzes students. They stop taking risks. They stop taking difficult classes because they might ruin their GPA.
Which is so ironic, right? Because university is supposed to be the place where you stretch your brain, where you tackle the hardest problems. But if you are obsessed with the grade, you'll naturally gravitate toward the easiest path to that A. You'll take the easy A electives instead of the challenging technical course that might actually help you in your career.
Precisely. We see this all the time, students asking, is this going to be on the test? That question is the death knell of curiosity. It means the student has filtered out anything that doesn't directly contribute to the metric. They're ignoring the signal and focusing entirely on the noise of the grading rubric.
It's a tragedy, really. We're turning universities into certification factories rather than, laboratories of thought. But this obsession, it isn't happening in a vacuum. It's being driven by something.
It is, and that leads us directly to the second element in our source material.
Right. Point number 2. Exam pressure and heavy academic load.
Oh.
The visual here shows a clock ticking away and a calendar that looks completely full. It's the classic finals week nightmare.
The universal symbols of student anxiety?
Let's dig into this heavy academic load. We aren't just talking about the difficulty of the material, are we? We are talking about the sheer volume. It feels like drinking from a fire hose.
It does, and we have to consider the biological reality of this. When the source mentions exam pressure, we aren't just talking about feeling nervous. We're talking about a specific physiological state. When a student is under chronic heavy academic load, their body is just flooded with cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Yes. Now, in small doses, cortisol is fine. It wakes you up. It focuses the mind for short bursts. But under chronic stress, the kind you get from a semester of overloading cortisol, actually impairs the function of the hippocampus.
And for our technical listeners, the hippocampus is essentially the brain's save button, right?
That is exactly what it is. It's the center for memory formation. So think about the irony here. The pressure designed to make you learn is chemically disabling the part of your brain responsible for learning.
That is profound. So when students are pulling those all-nighters, chugging energy drinks, staring at the books till their eyes bleed, what we call cramming, they are actually working against their own biology.
Completely. And let's talk about cramming for a moment. In cognitive science, we compare massed practice, which is cramming against spaced repetition.
Massed practice versus spaced repetition. It sounds like an engineering efficiency problem.
It is, in a way. Imagine you're trying to water a lawn. You can dump 1,000 gallons of water on it in 1 hour. That's cramming. What happened?
It floods, the water just runs off, the roots probably absorb a tiny percentage, and the rest is completely wasted.
Exactly. Or you could water it for 15 minutes every day for a month. The total volume of water is the same, but the absorption, the retention, is totally different. The heavy academic load often forces students into the flood method. They dump the information onto their brain, it sits on the surface long enough to pass the exam, and then it runs off.
I think everyone listening has experienced that. The brain dump. You walk out of the exam hall, and you can physically feel the information leaving your body. 2 days later, you couldn't pass that same test if your life depended on it.
That is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve in action. Without spaced reinforcement, the brain aggressively deletes information it deems irrelevant. And if you only learned it to pass a test, your brain classifies it as irrelevant the moment the test is over.
So the system actively promotes a cycle of stress, cram, regurgitate, forget.
That's a harsh way to put it, but
yeah.
Yes. And the tragedy is that this is happening during the years when students are supposed to be building their foundational knowledge for their entire careers. If you're an engineering student and you flush your calculus knowledge because you were just cramming for the grade, that building is going to collapse later when you try to add advanced structural analysis on top of it.
Because the foundation isn't cured concrete. It's just wet mud.
Exactly. Wet mud.
This sounds incredibly inefficient. I mean, if we ran a factory like this where 90% of the product produced, which is knowledge, was discarded immediately after the quality check, the exam, we would go bankrupt.
We would. And that inefficiency is what creates the deficit we see in the next section. If we're spending all our energy on this grade game, what are we neglecting?
Which brings us to point number 3, lack of practical and soft skills. The visual here shows a clipboard with a checklist, and crucially, an icon of a light bulb and a handshake.
The handshake is a very telling symbol there.
It is. But let's clarify something first. The term soft skills. I always hated that term. It sounds weak. It sounds like something optional,
I agree completely. In the technical world, we often dismiss soft skills as the fluffy stuff, but I prefer to think of them as interface skills.
Yeah, interface skills. I like that. Explain that for our technical audience.
Okay, think of a computer system. You have the hardware, the processor, the RAM, the hard drive. That's your technical knowledge. That's your ability to solve the differential equation or code the algorithm. But then you have the operating system, the OS. The OS manages the resources. It talks to the user. It connects to other networks.
So soft skills are the operating system.
Yes. If you have the most powerful processor in the world, you are a genius at math. But your operating system is buggy, prone to crashing, and has a terrible user interface. The computer is useless. No one can use your power.
That is a brilliant metaphor. So soft skills are things like communication, empathy, teamwork, adaptability. If those are missing, your hard skills are just locked inside your head.
Exactly. And let's look at the practical side of this point, too. The source mentions a lack of practical skills. This is the difference between theory and application.
Right. It's the classic difference between the physicist and the engineer. The physicist assumes a spherical cow in a vacuum. The engineer has to deal with a real cow that kicks and smells.
The spherical cow. Yes. University education, by its nature, often takes place in a vacuum. The problems are clean. They have one right answer. All the variables are given to you in the problem statement.
Assume air resistance is negligible.
Right. But in the real world, air resistance is never negligible. The data is messy. Half the variables are missing. And the client doesn't even know what they want half the time. Universities often fail to teach students how to function in that messy reality.
I remember a story about a straight-A electrical engineering student. He could design the most complex circuits on paper, but when he got to his first job, he didn't know how to strip a wire without cutting the copper strands. He had the theory, but his hands didn't know the job.
That is the practical gap. And then you add the soft skill gap on top of it. Can that brilliant engineer explain to the non-technical project manager why the circuit needs to be redesigned? Can they handle the conflict when the manager says, no, we don't have the budget?
And that is where the handshake icon from the source comes in. It's about negotiation, about human connection.
It is. And for our listeners of the L1RN podcast, many of whom might be learning technical English as a second language, this is a double challenge. Not only do you have to master the soft skills of communication, but you have to do it in a language that isn't your mother tongue.
That is a huge point. It adds another layer of friction, doesn't it?
Right.
If you're shy or lack confidence in your soft skills, doing it in English can be terrifying. So you retreat back to the math, back to the code, where language doesn't matter as much.
Which just reinforces the isolation. But the reality is, in the global job market, English is the protocol of that interface. You cannot bypass it.
So we've established that universities are great at teaching the hardware, the technical facts, but often terrible at installing the operating system, the soft skills. And this leads to a massive disconnect when these students finally graduate.
Which brings us to point number 4, the gap between university and job market.
The visual in our source is a signpost pointing in two completely opposite directions. To the left, university. To the right, job market. It implies they're getting further and further apart.
And in many ways, they are. The pace of change in the job market is exponential. New technologies, new methodologies, AI, automation. The pace of change in university curriculums is, well, let's just call it geologic.
Glacial. By the time a university approves a new course on a specific software, that software is already obsolete.
Exactly. This creates the gap. But I want to talk about the gap in expectations versus reality. We often hear employers complaining that graduates aren't work ready.
I hear this constantly. They're smart, but they're useless. That's their harsh feedback from hiring managers. Why is the transfer of skills so poor? We call this the transfer problem in education, right?
Yes. The transfer problem is the difficulty of applying knowledge learned in one context, the classroom, to a different context, the workplace. And the contexts are just too different. In university, the path is linear. You have a syllabus. You know exactly what's coming in week 4, week 8, and week 12.
It's a railroad track. You just have to stay on the train.
But the job market is an off-road rally. There is no map. The objectives change midweek. You might be working on a project, and suddenly the client cancels it, or the regulations change. A student who has been trained on the railroad track falls apart when you put them in the mud.
Because they're looking for the syllabus. They're waiting for the professor to tell them what the assignment is.
And the boss is waiting for them to figure out what needs to be done. This is what I call the agency gap. In school, agency is low. You are told what to do. In work, agency is high. You must decide what to do.
But let me play devil's advocate again here. If the gap is so big, why do employers still demand degrees? I mean, if I show up with great soft skills and a portfolio of projects but no degree, most big companies won't even look at my resume. So clearly, the university is providing some value they want.
That's true. The degree acts as a signaling mechanism. It signals conscientiousness. It tells the employer, this person can stick with a difficult long-term goal for 4 years, they can show up on time, they can jump through hoops. That has value.
So it's a filter. It proves you're trainable, not necessarily that you are trained.
Exactly. Employers are hiring for potential. But the frustration comes when that potential takes 6 months to become productive because the graduate doesn't know how to write a professional email, or how to manage a meeting, or how to use version control software like Git because their university was still asking them to submit code on paper.
On paper, that still happens, doesn't it? It's frightening.
It does. So the gap is really a latency issue. The graduate has the raw processing power, but there's a massive delay, a latency before they become useful, because they have to unlearn the habits of school and learn the habits of work.
Okay, so if the system is broken, if the university road leads to a cliff and the job market road starts somewhere else, how do we bridge it? We can't just wait for universities to overhaul their entire structure. That will take, what, 50 years?
We can't wait. And that brings us to the most empowering part of this deep dive. Point number 5, the student's role in self-development.
This is the pivot point, isn't it? The visual shows a student holding a book, but also holding a glowing light bulb. He looks engaged. He looks active.
Active is the key word. Up until now, we've described the student as a victim of the system, stressed, obsessed, unprepared. Now we flip the script.
The text says, student's role. This implies responsibility. If the university isn't teaching you the interface skills or the practical tools, who is responsible for learning them?
You are the student. You have to become what we call an autodidact, a self-teacher.
That sounds intimidating to a 20-year-old. Or self. Where do they even start?
It starts with recognizing the shadow curriculum.
The shadow curriculum sounds mysterious.
It's the list of things you need to know that aren't on the official syllabus. If you're a computer science student, the syllabus says Java 101. The shadow curriculum says how to work in an agile team, how to use Jira, how to communicate technical debt to a manager.
Okay. So once you realize that shadow curriculum exists, how do you learn it?
You have to step outside the classroom. The source image has a light bulb that represents the idea, the innovation. You get that by doing. Internships are the obvious answer, but not everyone can get a great internship.
That's true. So what if you can't get an internship?
You build something. We live in the maker era. If you are an engineer, build a drone in your garage. If you're a programmer, contribute to open source projects on GitHub. If you're a writer, start a blog. Do something that creates a tangible artifact.
I love the open source example because that forces you to collaborate, right? You have to read other people's messy code. You have to accept feedback when someone rejects your pull request. That is real world training.
It is.
Yeah.
It teaches you resilience. In university, if you get a question wrong, you get a red mark and a bad grade. In open source, if you get it wrong, the community tells you why, you fix it, and you try again. It's an iterative loop, which is how the real world works.
And what about the soft skills? I mean, how do you self-develop leadership or public speaking alone in your room?
You can't do that alone. You have to join communities. Join a student club, but don't just be a member. Run for treasurer. Run for president. Suddenly, you have to manage a budget. You have to resolve conflicts between members. That is low-stakes management training.
Or join something like Toastmasters for public speaking.
Absolutely. The point is, you have to treat your education like a business. You are the CEO of You Incorporated. The university is just a vendor providing one service, which is theoretical knowledge. You need to find other vendors for the other parts of your business.
That is a powerful mindset shift. The university is just a vendor. It stops you from expecting them to do everything for you. It puts the agency back in your hands.
And it changes how you view grades. If you are the CEO, the grades are just one KPI, one key performance indicator. They aren't the whole company.
I like that. Grades are just one KPI. Which leads us perfectly to the final, ultimate question of this deep dive. Point number 6. Are grades enough to build a future?
The climax of the discussion.
The visual here is quite loaded. We see a trophy, a diploma, and stacks of money symbolizing financial success and career stability. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Yes or no? Are grades enough?
No. Categorically no.
Okay, that was decisive, but let's nuance it a bit. Because we don't want listeners to think they should just flunk out of school to work on their soft skills.
No, please don't do that. Let's use a financial analogy. Grades are like your credit score.
Okay, explain that.
You need a decent credit score to get a loan for a house. If your score is terrible, the bank won't even talk to you. Grades act as that initial filter. They get you past the HR bot, they get you the interview, they represent your entry ticket.
So the grades get you into the room.
Right. But once you are inside the room, once you have the job, the credit score doesn't help you pay the mortgage. You need income. You need cash flow. In this analogy, skills are the cash flow. Skills are the currency you use to solve problems every day.
That's a great distinction. The diploma, the grades, are the permission to play the game. The future, the money and success, is built on how well you actually play.
Exactly. Think about the most successful people you know in the technical field. Do you have any idea what their GPA was in university?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't even know where some of them went to school, to be honest.
Because it became irrelevant the moment they proved they could deliver value. The half-life of a GPA is very short. It matters intensely for your first job. It matters a little bit for your second job. By your third job, nobody cares. They only care about what you achieved in your last role.
The portfolio beats the transcript.
Every single time. A portfolio shows what you did. A transcript shows what you passed. Those are very different things.
So, looking at that visual with the money and the trophy, the path to that future isn't a straight line from the A+. It's a winding road that requires the A+ as a foundation, but the soft skills and practical skills as the vehicle.
And the self-development as the fuel.
The fuel. I like that.
Yeah.
Because the world changes. The skills you learned in university will be obsolete in 10 years, maybe even 5. If you don't have the engine of self-development, that curiosity to keep learning, you will stall.
That's the T-shaped professional concept. You want a broad bar of general skills, communication, adaptability, business sense. That's the top of the T. And then you want a deep vertical bar of technical expertise. Grades measure the vertical bar. Life and success requires the horizontal bar, too.
This has been such a rich discussion. I feel like we have really dismantled this topic. We've gone from biology to economics to computer architecture analogies.
It's a multidimensional problem, so it needs a multidimensional analysis.
Let's try to synthesize this for our listeners. We started with the obsession-Goodhart's law, where the metric becomes the enemy of learning. We looked at pressure, how cortisol literally stops us from learning deeply.
We identified the missing interface, the soft skills and practical application. We acknowledged the gap between the clean academic world and the messy real world.
Then we empowered the student to become the CEO of their education through self-development. And finally, we decided that while grades are the entry ticket, skills are the currency of the future.
That is a perfect summary.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a final challenge, something to take away and actually do.
I have a challenge for the learners out there. Next time you're studying for an exam, stop and ask yourself a question. Don't ask, is this on the test? Ask yourself, if I had to explain this concept to my grandmother, could I do it? And if I had to use this concept to solve a problem that isn't in the book, what would that look like?
Moving from memorization to translation and application.
Exactly. Try to connect the dot to something outside the classroom. If you do that, the grade will probably take care of itself. But more importantly, you will actually keep the knowledge.
That is great advice. Focus on the learning, and the grades will follow, but don't let the grades lead the learning.
Precisely.
Thank you so much for walking us through this deep dive. It's been incredibly insightful.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to unpack these things with you.
And thank you to everyone listening to the L1 Oren Technical English Podcast. We know studying is hard. We know the pressure is real. But remember, you're building a life, not just a transcript. Keep building those skills, keep asking questions, and we will see you in the next episode. Until next time.
Goodbye, everyone.